First of all, I'd like to thank you all for practicing the Dharma, because each of us in the Dharma represents all sentient beings. Each of us is connected through our karmic traits collected in past lives with all sentient beings. And if we practice the Dharma, particularly in the Tibetan tradition, through the use of the Bodhisattva vow and through meditating on rays of light going out and connecting us with all sentient beings, we are actually at all times interconnected with all sentient beings in all realms. And so in meeting one person, we meet all people. In meeting one person, we meet all possibilities. And in the practice of the Dharma, we try to become all possibilities for all sentient beings. When the Buddha taught, he taught what's traditionally described as 84,000 dharmas. That's to say, many different kinds of dharmas, in order to make a point of connection with each person. This view of the vastness of the world is, I think, first taken up in the Vimala Nirdesha Sutra, in which there's a long description of Indra's net. And Indra's net is a net that covers the entire universe, and it's a net of points of crystals, and each of the crystals is linked up to every other crystal by a chain of light. And so by looking into the face of one mirror-like aspect of the crystal, you see all the other crystal faces reflected. So in each moment of life, in each meeting with another person, in each meeting with ourselves, everything is complete. And this is the essential view of Dzogchen. In this word, Dzogpa means complete or perfect or fully formed. And Chenpo means great. So it means there's nothing missing from this. However, most of the time we live experiencing something missing in our lives. And we live in a culture that offers us many possibilities of filling up the gaps in our lives, from the most materialistic, fashion-focused, indulgent methods, to a vast array of spiritual techniques, all the possibilities that come about in the New Age movement, and this plethora of Hindu and Tibetan teachers, and many possibilities are there for us to learn things. But how can we know what to choose? This is a very profound question, I think, for this time, because there's a danger of the Dharma becoming a commodity which we use to improve the quality of our lives, something that reduces our stress or gives us a bit more purpose in life, or makes us happier, nicer, more friendly people, so that we'll be able to make more friends and feel more at peace in the world. And there's nothing wrong with any of these intentions. Obviously, they're very good intentions. It's very important that we all become as warm and open and friendly and helpful as possible. But the Dharma itself has perhaps another purpose. The Dharma is essentially subversive. It acts in us to open up a gap, to introduce something new. And I think we can find in the Dharma teachings, in the development with the Hinayana, Mahayana, Tantric teachings, and then Dzogchen, an ongoing tension that exists between the desire for security and order, and on the other hand, a movement towards questioning, disintegration, movement, or playfulness. So putting ourselves into question is at the heart of the Buddhist path. And in order to put oneself into question, one has to find a middle way between order and chaos. When one goes for teachings, one gets a lot of information, a lot of knowledge. And there are many books on the Dharma. And if we read all these books, what will we get? Well, they might open university departments on Buddhism. You could get a job. And that will surely happen in this culture. There's more and more interest in Buddhism, in European philosophy, in psychotherapy and psychoanalysis. And there are always conferences on seminars on looking at, Tibetan readings of modern art and Tibetan readings of modern philosophy. I mean, these things will mushroom and grow, and they're very interesting and exciting. And we will witness the development of a Buddhist culture in the West. I was talking with some ecologists from California, and they were saying that in the San Francisco area now, there's a huge body of journals on Buddhism, because there are so many immigrant populations there who are Buddhist, many Koreans, many people from Vietnam. They are now reacting to modern American culture and making readings of American culture through Buddhist eyes. And so the sense of identity and security and safety that one might experience as a Buddhist is likely to get stronger. There's going to be more Buddhists around and more events to join in. And as a counterpoint to that, on the other side, there are many individualistic interpretations of traditional teachings that people develop through their own inspiration or through their own desire for self-aggrandizement or through lostness or confusion. So for us practicing the Dharma in the West, how do we find a balance between spending a lot of time aligning ourselves with a traditional culture, which may take a long, long time to really make sense to us, and at the same time find a way of continuing the ordinary lives that we have with, jobs, houses, children, whatever our situation. I think that the view of Dzogchen is very important in opening up a gap that permits the ordinary to continue as ordinary and yet to be integrated into a wider view. Dzogchen begins with emptiness. And emptiness in this sense is it's not a move against the world. We don't start with the impression that things are strongly real and then have to use emptiness as an antidote to that. There are two ways into it. One is practicing Jine in what Rinpoche this morning was talking about as a sort of higher way, not calming the mind that is concerned simply with reducing the number of thoughts, but a calming the mind which in a way that lets the mind be calm as thoughts arise. The other way in is through a tantric practice where at some point in the practice you dissolve, either the deity dissolves into you and then you into emptiness, or yourself as a deity and dissolve into emptiness. And in these moments of emptiness, we can recognize what we actually are. In the Dzogchen tradition as well, there is a method of introduction to oneself. In Tibetan it's called ngotro, and ngo means face or self, and tro means to meet or to recognize. But all our lives we wander around behind our face. We don't really see our own face. Our face exists between ourselves and other people. This is my face, but I can't see it, and you can see it. So you have my face more than I do. We exist in the world. Our enlightenment will not be somewhere else. My enlightenment is not inside me and then comes out into the world. Enlightenment is the recognition that we are enworlded. In the last 40 years, many people have been struggling to open up or remove the split between body and mind that is attributed to Descartes. And in a sense, what I'm saying from the point of view of Dzogchen is a continuation of that. That for a long time we were thinking that we are somehow a mind inhabiting a body, separate from our body, and that, through doing things like yoga and shiatsu and massage, people somehow feel that they live in their bodies, that I am my body. And that's I'm sure many people here have had that sort of experience, that it feels different to actually own your body and live through your body. And from the point of view of Dzogchen, we take that further and say, I am this world. This is all my world. When I look around the world, this is the difference between me and you is not so great, because what is actually arising is a totality, a field of awareness in which there are a variety of sensations. Some of these are color, some are sound, some feel as if they are inside this body. But if I relax my editing, my naming, this is me inside, this is you outside, there's actually a rippling out, a containment in which everything is present at once. And this is radically different from the Mahayana view, in which we are aware of other people and their suffering, and we might then intend to work to alleviate, to lift the suffering of other people, which is presented as if we have a choice whether to be connected with other people or not. From the point of view of Dzogchen, there is no choice. Enlightenment is not anywhere else. There's nowhere else to go, because we cannot take ourselves out of a context and put it somewhere else. And I think there's a question here of the relationship between faith and belief. Well, in English, perhaps faith would be more, to have faith would be very kind of open to something, whereas belief is more specific and it predicts something. I believe you will not betray me, because a lot of the practices that we do from Tantra are predicting something. If you do this every day, when you die, you go to Zangdepauri. If you do this practice often enough, you will see some colored lights, or you will feel happier, or you won't be such a bastard. Because the view from this point of view is that certain things can be identified as not good, which should then be avoided, and other things can be identified as being good, which we should try to get more of. And that's essentially the view from the Hinayana position. And although in Tantra we talk of transforming the 5 poisons into the 5 wisdoms, it's still an assumption or an acceptance that wisdom is better than poison. And then because of that, when we do our practice and it doesn't go very well, we feel that we failed or done something badly. And then we can feel angry or depressed or frustrated or give up or try harder. And in that way, doing the practice evokes negative feelings or excited, hopeful feelings, which take us further into duality. The position from Dzogchen is different. There are many teachings in the Semde section of the Dzogchen teachings, which focus around the famous 3 statements from Garab Dorji. And in the first of these, he says, what is required is to, as it were, wake up on the point. It means like, say I'm sitting here and it's a bit warm and I start to drift off, and I suddenly come back onto this seat. And in waking up, I haven't arrived anywhere else except the place where I've always been, although it felt as if I was very far away. And this is the beginning of Dzogchen. What we need to do is to have that experience of waking up, of recognition. And if I'm asleep, it wouldn't be very helpful for me to be carried in an ambulance to Frankfurt to wake up. When I woke up, I get a terrible shock and I wouldn't know where I was. In the traditional descriptions of the Buddha, after he gained enlightenment, he was to exhibit these 32 and 64 important marks on his body. One of these is that he's 12 foot high, golden in color, with webs between his fingers and his feet, the toes on his feet. So in that way, enlightenment is set up as being something very different, very other, so that in order to find myself, I have to become so different from myself, I would just not know who the hell I was. And certainly I would be unemployed if I was 12 foot tall and golden in color. I mean, that's being a little bit, I don't know, silly. But in order to integrate the Dharma into our lives, it's very important that it's something that doesn't mark us out as special. There's such a powerful force in the culture that we live in to develop our individuality, to become special in some way. That the practice of Dharma, almost the more invisible it becomes, the easier it is to protect us from investing it with an extra edge of performance or egotism or some kind of counter, some kind of mark as a token of social exchange to make us more interesting people at dinner parties. What I do now is go through some of the basic points of our real nature as viewed from Dzogchen, and then look at the Dzogchen account of how samsara begins, how we become woven into this world of confusion. But maybe there's some questions or comments on what I said already.
Tantra, it's like the points of wisdom, and then you said the view of Dzogchen is different. My question is Dzogchen part of the Tantra?
This morning, Rinpoche was giving sort of classifications of meditation and stages. And although these things are quite interesting, in the end they give me a bit of a headache because they're very, very clear in the book. But when I sit and I try to work out where is my own meditation, it's kind of difficult to take that template and put it on top. And I think you can do the same with the different yanas, that they overlap quite a bit. In the Nyingma system, there are different classifications. The largest one is that there are 9 yanas. And what separates off the different yanas is their view. In Tibetan it's called tawa. And a tawa is a way of looking. A tawa sets out how we look at the world, so that if I put on sunglasses, things look a bit different. And if I put myself into this particular way of viewing, the world will look different. Okay? One general way of grouping these different yanas is those that belong to the yanas, or the view of the cause, and those that belong to those of the result. Those of the cause are concerned with accumulating the merit that's required to lay a basis for enlightenment, developing the basic meditation skills of concentration, developing a sense of concern for other people, which is essentially a movement out from inside oneself, out into the world, to recognize that I belong in this in some way. And in the Tibetan tradition, the Hinayana and the Sutra Mahayana would belong in that grouping. And the other grouping, including all the Tantras, the Tantra focus, and Dzogchen, is generally the path of the result, because they're the paths that work as if we were already in the result in some way, as if we had already arrived. And there's a gradual movement up the 6 sections of Kriya Yoga, Charya Yoga, and so on up to Ati Yoga. In the earlier paths, you have to put a lot more effort into it. You have to make outer offerings and take a bath before you do the meditation. Everything has to be very pure. If there's anything dirty, it's seen to spoil the practice. If you forget your lines, if you do things in the wrong order, it's seen as being a very big mistake. And in Mahayoga, which is the group of practices that includes some of the very large mandalas, where each detail of the deity's body has to be visualized very precisely, and there's a very slow build-up of the visualization stage by stage. An enormous amount of effort's required. I mean, if you do that kind of practice on your own, for me anyway, it takes about 12 hours to do. It takes a long, long time, and there's so much because you've got to sit and try to get things clear and then go on, and it requires a huge amount of effort. In the next level, though, in Anu Yoga, the visualization is accomplished in an instant. It's compared to a fish suddenly turning in water and you just see a flash of color. So in an instant, you are transformed and the whole world is transformed. So the visualization, it's as if you're in a room and you put the light on and suddenly everything's there. You don't build it up, it's just present. But there's still a kind of intentionality in it. One is still becoming Machik Labdran or Tara or Purba, whatever the deity is. So one starts with one's ordinary situation and then creates something which is perceived as being in some way better. And then having been in that better place for a while, when you come out of that meditation, the ordinary world is transformed. And by doing that meditation, that kind of meditation a lot, one's moving, flipping, as it were, from this perception, this dimension, to another dimension and back again. A bit like a damaru clicking. And after a while, the more you click it, it's just like a blur. They just move in and out of each other. And so finally, I come to answer your question. In Dzogchen, there is no intention to get anywhere else. There's nothing is being privileged or prioritized above where we are now. And instead of trying to do something, one is allowing oneself not to do things. So that if say in Mahayoga or Anu Yoga, in the meditation, you make some mistake, usually at the end of the text, as you'll find in that large Rigson text, there is some kind of confession. If I've said it the wrong words or mixed things up, then I confess for this. Because wherever there is an intention, there is a determination, a trajectory out into the world, which can be adhered to or erred from. You can go astray from it. Whereas in Dzogchen, because there's no intention to set up or gain or achieve anything, the only error is in trying to gain something or feeling sad or guilty or bad that you didn't achieve it. It's a completely reversed situation. So the view is essentially a view of great openness and generosity. As it often says in the meditation text, whatever comes, comes, whatever goes, goes. And we, if you like, the only way to make a mistake in Dzogchen is to feel excited that something good has come or upset that something bad has come. Because in that way, we act against the view of Dzogchen. Dzogchen says whatever arises is perfect. Everything is just completely okay as it is. And then we superimpose onto this naturally perfect reality our own bias, our own prejudice. And we do this all the time. Milarepa said, if you understand this in the morning, you're a Buddha in the morning. If you understand it in the evening, you're a Buddha in the evening. And it means really that nirvana is not very far away. And if we say nirvana is far away, we are insulting ourselves. And that's very easy to do. In my experience, most people think they're shit. And I think that's why Tantra is very difficult. Because if you believe you're shit, why will you want to be a god? And I think this low self-esteem is so pervasive in our culture that to really believe that Buddha nature is not something very, very far away in the future or very, very far away in the past is very difficult. Because to take up that belief so quickly then moves into the other side, into egotism and an inflation of the self. And certainly working as a psychotherapist, most of the people that I see profoundly hate themselves, profoundly see no real possibility in life. So we can see that, I mean, the Dharma offers so many possibilities of approaching that. One would be to, support these people in some way, or to give them some purification practice, or to give some tantric practice of transformation. But for Dzogchen, it's very, very different. The doorway into Dzogchen is to believe in yourself. I use the word belief, but I think it's the wrong word, really. I mean, what's important is to recognize oneself. To believe in oneself is already to take up a position towards oneself. And that's what we do all the time. I am good, I am bad. And there's a fundamental division between the I and the me, between subjectivity and the objectivity of the ego existence. To think of oneself or to perceive, to make a statement about oneself is to take up a split position from oneself. So I can say, oh, I am James Lowe, and sometimes I'm Guru Rinpoche, and sometimes I'm Tara. And that's very useful because it opens up a possibility of being. Because if I can be Padmasambhava, then who the hell is James Lowe? So it becomes a subversive movement opening up the question of who I am. Because we are exactly what we define ourselves to be. And Dzogchen puts the whole question of self-definition very much into play. Because nothing is forbidden. So I can be jealous or angry or envious or greedy. And that's okay, because it won't last forever. It's because we don't believe in impermanence that we get upset when we're bad. In the view of Dzogchen, samsara and nirvana are born together. They are always present. They're like twins born from the same mother. And like twins, they often fight, and one wants to be better than the other. So maybe we look a little bit at the essential view in Dzogchen. And there are three sections to the Dzogchen teachings: the Sem Day, the Long Day, and the Menak Day. Sem Day section deals mainly with, if you like, sort of philosophical definitions of what reality is. Long Day works more at energy transformation in order to make the view of Sem Day sustainable through different situations. And Menak Day has particular kinds of practices that support that. In a text by Padmasambhava called the Sangha Lamrim, which is like the stages of Tantra, he gives an account of what in Tibetan is called Neluk, or we might say reality. Ne means to stay or to abide, and look means a style or way. So it means how things are, how the world is sitting in itself. And there are four points that he makes. He says, let's call this thing reality. Reality, he says, is non-dual. It is effortlessly arising. It's pure from the very beginning. And it is primordial Buddhahood. So if we start with non-dual and think about what this means. Because one of the things I certainly like about Dzogchen is that it lets me think. A great deal of Tibetan Buddhism is about learning things and getting knowledge and packing oneself in with this information. But from the point of view of Dzogchen, what we have to do is to question and inquire and look very profoundly into things. It's not something that one can just swallow like a medicine pill. Because the view is something that one has to incorporate into one's own being so that one views out with it, through it. But it doesn't predict any kind of conduct or behavior. So that through Tantra you might learn different kinds of antidotes or different kinds of ways of behaving to situations. And so be able to take something that was outside in the teacher's instruction, take it into your memory, and then apply it out there. But with Dzogchen we have to, because everything is allowed, one cannot project out from the past. One is living on the cusp of time. The trajectory of the three times of past, present, and future is broken. All that we know from the past need not apply in the future. Each moment is completely open, so that anything is possible. And in that way it fulfills the Mahayana definition of enlightenment, which is minepe nangaledepa, an enlightenment that doesn't rest anywhere, that is just dancing. So, nime or non-dual is the fact that one can never find a point of separation between two objects or a subject and an object. And this is true because if you look into either object or subject, what do you find? Because European languages have a very strong verb which determines, this is the floor, this is the wall. And of course, we're born into language, we grow through language. Language is part of our karma. And the karma of these European languages is one that we see through capitalist development is taking over the whole world through a very powerful identification of nameable, desirable objects. These Indo-European languages fundamentally define the relationship of subject and object in the language of mastery. And this power of naming of objects makes the questioning of the object quite difficult, because it's as if subject and object are held apart by a very powerful verb. The task from Dzogchen to understand non-duality is to inquire into the nature of subject and object. So when I say, it's hot, I'm hot, who is the I that is hot? Because if I don't know who the I is who's hot, I'm bullshitting myself all the time. And language is one of the primary determinants of our karma. So one might see Chomsky as a bodhisattva.
Who is he? People don't know.
He's a linguistic philosopher. Because there's a great deal in Western culture that is very amazing and wonderful. And Dzogchen is very open to this, because if everything is perfect, then there's a great deal that's perfect already in our world. The question is, how will we know? And only by inquiry. So a very basic way into Dzogchen is to pose the question, where do thoughts come from? Where do thoughts stay? Where do they go? What color are they? What shape are they? These are questions that I think it's very important to struggle with, because they are one of the main doorways into a moment of realization, a moment of understanding. Again, to think in terms of language, we speak a language that is very much developed in interaction in the outside world. And then we turn that language around into ourselves and use it to make sense of who we are. This carries with it a tremendous force of reification. So the view of Nime says very clearly, subject and object arise from the same ground. This ground has no beginning or end, no top or bottom. When you look for it, you can't find anything. And yet it's constantly providing things, including yourself. So if you follow these questions in, and yet out of the nothing, everything arises. There is no other place for anything to arise from. So the critical point when we begin this kind of meditation is the difference between inquiring and looking and opening up this sense of emptiness, or spaciousness, and the experience of our ordinary world. That's why in Dzogchen a great deal of meditation is done with open eyes, so that meditation doesn't reaffirm a split between myself and the world, but rather is an opportunity to appreciate the rippling between, a rippling between 2 points of nothingness, inside nothing, out there at the end nothing, and in the middle this shimmering moment of co-presence. So in this way there is the sense that the whole world is one vast sphere of emptiness, with this middle way or middle point in which samsara and nirvana are playing together all the time. This is a different way of viewing the middle way from one which sees it as a safe place between the extremes of eternal existence and nothingness, a kind of nihilistic nothingness. Because our experience here is unborn, because when we look into the self who is experiencing the world, we can't find anything. And when we look out, everything is shimmering and alive, but without any self-substance, because it's transforming all the time. And that unfolding is undying or unceasing. And this, because things have never been born, because they have never come into a separate true existence, there is nothing there to die. And the traditional image for this is a mirror. If one looks into a mirror, one doesn't find anything. The mirror seems somehow to be empty in itself. And yet the mirror, the surface of the mirror is always shimmering and full of images. The image seems to be real, and yet it's unborn. It can't leave its mother's womb, if you like. And yet image as image is unceasing, because it keeps changing and playing and transforming. And when we hang on to some definition of ourselves, and the play of the world continues, we sort of try to step out of the dance because we want to hold a tune that was playing last year. But the world, another record goes on and we can't dance, and then bang, we're hit. So Dzogchen is to stay in the dance, to allow ourselves to be changing, to be unborn as anything. So if we take these questions seriously, where do thoughts come from? Where do they stay? Where do they go? Or where do I come from? Where do I stay? Where do I go? if we really inquire through these questions deeply into the nature of the self, who am I, what am I, then when a definition comes out, I am this, I am that, there is a sense of that definition as a playful gesture out into this beautiful shining space that will dissolve. So I am this, I am that, I am many, many things. And that's very nice. And then this opens the door to compassion, because when we start to give up all the heaviness and guilt and depressing negative self-definition, we find that all around us there are many people who are quite happy to hold that function for us, and will be very angry that we've changed or we're not as responsible as we were. Or, you probably experienced that at some time in your life. So compassion is then to reaffirm one's position in the dance, not to let other people switch the music off. The world is not a serious place, and the world is turned into a hell by serious people, and we should be very careful with them. But the best thing is not to reply in that language, because it will grab you. And through the view of non-duality, whoever is in the world is not separate from ourselves. So keeping that open awareness, one can include Saddam Hussein in whatever one does, and include everyone in everything that one does, so that whatever joy and freedom and happiness one has, it's just playfully available. And that's probably almost time. Noam Chomsky is an American linguistic philosopher who had a sense that language is a play on the surface from a deep structure which is very difficult to determine.
Are there words in Tibetan for self and I and so on? What are they?
What are they? Dak.
Du hast gefragt, was die tibetischen Wörter sind für Ich und Selbst, oder?
Also ob das dann da gibt, weil ja sagt, unsere Sprache ist so, das Ich und das Sein so.
Because you said that our language...
Yes. Yeah. Even if you invented a perfect language, it wouldn't take away ignorance and stupidity. I mean, what we need is less knowledge and less information. We know much too much and we're far too clever. And being stupid is a very good thing for entering Dzogchen. I remember Rinpoche, Siya Lama, said to me that Manjushri, he has this sword of wisdom. And he said the blade is on both sides. You can cut out ignorance, but when your arm gets tired, it cuts your own head off. And all that we need to know is, where do I come from? Who am I? Where am I going? That's not too much to ask. Okay, maybe one more.
One question. Why did you join the teacher?
Why?
Why did you join the puja then?
But that would to me to make a decision between joining or not joining. There's a story about Shankaracharya, who is a Hindu philosopher, and he taught a system called Advaita Vedanta, which is non-dual, and is in many ways very similar to Dzogchen, because although Buddhists don't like to believe it, lots of people throughout the world have understood this, because it's natural. Western capitalism wants to take over all the worldly resources of the world, wants to eat up the forest in the Amazon, and we have to be careful that Buddhists don't go out and try and steal everyone else's religious tradition and say, oh, but the Dharma says this. I think that's political. But anyway, Shankaracharya, he taught a non-dual philosophy, and he was in a town in South India. And he was a high Brahmin, and he was getting a lot of respect from the king. And the local Brahmins were very jealous of this. They didn't like it because he was getting a lot of money from the king that they thought should be coming to them. So when he came out of giving a teaching, they arranged for a mad elephant to run down the road towards him. And when Shankaracharya saw the elephant, he ran away very, very quickly. And at the end of it, these Brahmins came up to him with the king and they said, you said that everything is emptiness, everything is Maya, it's just an illusion. Why did you run away? And he said, well, running away is illusion too. Okay, and we have another time tomorrow. And if any of you have it, this in the long Rixin text, there is this encouragement on impermanence, which is quite nice to read because it's many of the ideas are there, and we could go through some of that tomorrow. And keeping your mind calm, just allow yourself to be aware of the room you're sitting in. Taking the busyness of the world into meditation is very important in Dzogchen. As long as we see the world and meditation as opposed, as enemies, we have problems. The world is very big and it keeps changing. And no matter how much we try to control it or to make some place safe and secure for ourselves, sooner or later something shifts and we're left crying. So rather than retreating from the world, the view of Dzogchen invites us to go out and welcome the world. Our mind is as big as the world. Traditionally, when we start to think about how we should listen to the Dharma, there's an instruction on what are called the 3 pot faults. And some of you may have heard these before. The first is to listen to the Dharma as if you were an upturned pot, so nothing goes into it if you pour something in. And that happens when we're so full of our own thoughts and worries and concerns that there's no space for anything new. The second fault is to be like a pot with a hole in the bottom, so that everything drains out quickly. So we hear something and then after a while we don't remember really what it was. And the third fault is said to be like a dirty pot, a pot with some old rotten food in the bottom. You put in new fresh food, but the new food gets mixed with the old, and after a while it's all just a mess. The implications of this way of thinking are pretty clear, that you should somehow evacuate yourself. But that's very difficult if you live in the world, because in order to survive you need to know lots of things. And not just neutral things, but you have to have opinions and attitudes and judgments and feelings and likes and dislikes. If you got rid of all of these things, people wouldn't think you were human anymore. And certainly all the lamas I've ever met have had plenty of judgments and opinions and funny feelings. So there's some kind of paradox, some kind of tension between a kind of ideal form that is pure in an outer sense of being simple and straight all the way through, and what is the actual quality of being a human being in the world, which is pretty messy and complex and full of conflicts and doubts. So many of the Dharma paths are seeking to simplify life. And these are also very helpful. But since our lives are short and we're probably very busy, a view that helps us to make friends with our own mess and not to feel so bad about it is probably useful. This may sound like some of the teachings that come from California, and they're very self-indulgent, giving you permission to do whatever you like. But it's not quite the same. Because central to our concern is the question of authority. Well, a lot of us come into the Dharma because we don't know what the fuck we're up to. We're pretty lost and out of control. And from a therapeutic point of view or analytic point of view, you could say that there's a lack of development of the superego, that we haven't managed to introject or take in some powerful, helpful, sustaining image, parental image. And so we get into all sorts of trouble and feel all sorts of complex guilt. And probably the older we get, the guilt comes quicker. And then along comes the guru. And we can say to the guru, hey, I'm completely lost, you take care of me. And some gurus do that. And they're very nice and they're very kind. And within a month of meeting them, you have 10 lifetimes of meditation practice. So that takes care of who you are and what you should be doing. As long as you do what you're told and trust the person, you can close down thinking and look forward to a happy retirement somewhere else. Meantime, if you're living in modern Europe, there's a slight conflict with the environment. There's a problem with ecology. You've become a foreign species. You become a Tibetan Buddhist and you don't fit in. And that's fine, and that may be very useful some of the time, but we may also have other desires to fit in and have some connectedness where to take on this position. And so some kind of adaptation of the teaching to our situation may be important. So we have, developmentally speaking, the crisis of adolescence. If we don't do what mom and dad say, and if we even start to feel that mom and dad don't understand us anymore, we can feel quite excited and creative, but also very scared and vulnerable. And I think it's at this point, which is a point that I feel that many people who practice the Dharma in the West, who've been in the Dharma for many years, who are not beginners, but who have Buddhism as a central feature of their life, struggle with. Because we can keep adapting ourselves towards the Dharma. But the Buddha taught many, many different kinds of teachings in order that his teaching would fit other people. The movement of compassion is to reach the other in the place where the other person is. So there's a question, can we take upon ourselves compassion to ourselves and meet ourselves where we are? This is very difficult. We carry guilt, shame, and humiliation like a dark pool of poison around our heart. But of course, in order to fit into the world, we have to behave appropriately. So it's a central question of how can I find a way to trust myself so that my own immediate spontaneous responsiveness will be ethically sound. The question of being, who am I, cannot be answered by anyone else. And the Buddha said exactly this when he said, I have shown a way, it's for people to follow it. The way that the Buddha taught is usually pointed as the way out there to an enlightenment. But really, the way that the Buddha demonstrated when he made his great movement to enlightenment was to accept this offering of kusha grass, put it under his bum and sit there. And then he inquired into himself. He examined the nature of his being. And he understood. And that essentially is what the Buddha points towards. Now, it's a big question from a Dzogchen point of view, and it's raised in many Dzogchen meditation texts, that if the meaning of enlightenment is to understand one's own nature, why should we spend so much time looking outside in the world, being very busy trying to find something? From the point of view of Dzogchen, all other Dharma practices are ways of supporting the central focus of attention of understanding the nature of the mind. They're like the supporting characters in a novel. If you take the central character out, the storyline falls apart. So central to the Dharma story is to know the nature of the mind, to understand awareness. Yesterday I mentioned these three statements from Garab Dorji. And the first one I mentioned is to recognize or to wake up on your own real nature, to recognize your own face. And this morning Rinpoche, in this church practice, when we were sitting quietly and he shouted, "Put!" there's a kind of movement or shock. If we are very tense, the shock is out. The more we can relax, the more the shock goes through and in, opening up a gap in which we can see something new. And that's very important, because this sitting quietly and shouting "Pat" is a very common practice in Dzogchen. As I was saying yesterday, the task is not to create something new. It's not to achieve some new goal of construction, but to deconstruct the familiar and create a gap. That's something that, in a sense, it's a rather different way, but it's also very familiar in Western culture since Sigmund Freud, because in many ways you could say that the idea of the unconscious is similar to the idea of emptiness. The unconscious is all pervasive, it permeates every aspect of our perception, and yet hovers side by side with our ego, with our conscious sense of self. And essentially what it does is it puts the ego into question. I mean, who am I if I have these kind of dreams? These things that pop out, that slip out. There's some kind of opening in which my normal self-definition, my normal foreclosure, my normal trajectory, patterning of myself, suddenly something else is happening. So a therapist, a psychotherapist working from an analytic point of view is attempting to make some space in which something new will happen. A space in which the familiar patterning of the defenses of the self, of the outlining of the self, starts to crumble because the other person, the analyst, is not keeping them in place. And of course that's very difficult for the analyst to do, because the client or the patient is all the time trying to seduce the analyst into being the one who will fulfill the familiar position. And this is technically called transference. Now, there are many other kinds of therapy: behavior therapy, cognitive therapy, systemic family therapy. We're not going to talk too much about therapy. The main thing about these therapies, though, they are ones in which the therapist takes up a more active position and is trying to meet the person so that the person's maybe shifted like that from their family, early family development, and the therapist is trying to impact them in some way and help them to stand up more straight. So they're making some intervention with energy and contact. Yeah? Now we can probably see that this is very similar to the different positions taken up by gurus. Because we can go to the teacher with a question, saying, I have something wrong in my life, what should I do? And the teacher might say, oh, that's very interesting, I think you should do this. You go away and you do it. It works out well and you think, what a wonderful guru. It doesn't work out well and you think, oh God, I got it wrong. Or the guru might say, that's stupid. Why are you wasting my time? And you're left thinking, And there's some attention is created. Either the guru's a very bad man, and the question's closed, or I'm very stupid and I'm very bad, and again the question's closed, or something's cooking, something's alive. There's some kind of grit or some kind of dust got underneath our eyes, and we're always struggling to see. And this is maybe very useful. I think that's the experience of many people in psychoanalysis, in which the analyst is always frustrating the desire. The person who gives us what we want confirms us in the pattern of our own desire. And so we just get more of the same, but maybe some fresh cream and strawberries on top. So the struggle in that kind of exchange, the analytic exchange, or the struggle with the guru who is perhaps more interested in putting us into question than providing solutions to our problems, is very, very important, because it is the question of authority. At the final stage in the tantric path, when you reach the moment of enlightenment, all the Buddhas of the 10 directions come to you and give you a great initiation called the Oso Chenpo Giwonku, the initiation of great light. Yeah. And rays of light come out of their hearts into your heart, and you're fulfilled, just as in the visualization practices we do, and just as in initiation. And then, having given you this great initiation, they tell you what your duties are. So in the moment of freedom, once again, we're caught up in something. Someone else's desire. One might wonder if this was written by Franz Kafka, or that might just be my paranoia. But I think it's very important as a metaphor, because again, what it's saying is, one could see it as a hierarchical determination of the individual will, or the fact that we are embedded in the world, and our determination is always in terms of the other. This is a very different notion from that of the Hinayana idea of a liberation which is an exit from the world, which is going somewhere else, and a final extinction, in which there's a kind of endless quiescence, nothing to do. Responsibility and duty is built into it. Dzogchen takes a slightly different reading of that story, because, as I was saying yesterday, compassion is not a choice from the point of view of Dzogchen. But it's not that it's not a choice because we are told to do it by the Buddhas, but because it's inscribed in the very nature of our being. I mean, in Tibetan language, they talk of what we say in English, sentient beings, as sem chen, having minds. And the nature of mind is to know and to respond. Everything about our being, when we are relaxed and open, is just to respond. And we're living here in a laboratory for examining that. With all these wonderful small children, when they get excited and want something, they run and get it. And when they're tired, they lie down. But for us, we maybe sit in the hot afternoon and have to sit very straight to show that we know how Buddhists sit, because we have learned how to be. And we need to do that because we've forgotten how to be. So the question is central. Through the Dharma, do we want to learn more about how to be, or do we want to forget about all that we know about how to be so that we can just be? And that's Dzogchen. Buy it today. So I'm getting a little bit here, there, and everywhere today, but yesterday I started with these 4 points of the about reality, and the first one yesterday was non-duality. The second one is spontaneity, and we've already really been exploring that a little bit. In the Tibetan word for spontaneity is hlundrup, and hlun means a kind of hill or a mountain, a mound, and drup means to create or to arise, to appear. So it's something that manifests in the whole, in itself. Just, it's not a construction. It's not stage by stage. One of the very big burdens that we carry is the responsibility for ourselves and for the environment we live in. And many people are justifiably concerned about ecology and what is happening to the world. And in relative truth terms, this is very important. But maybe some of you have experienced in meditation, at the end of the meditation, somehow things are just going along somehow by themselves. That the world as we experience it is falling into place effortlessly by itself all the time. In order to really accept this without feeling contradiction in oneself, one has to be able to appreciate that each moment is the best possible, in each moment is the best possible pattern for that moment. Because this spontaneity is not only good. Auschwitz was also an aspect of the Buddha's spontaneity from the point of view of this way of seeing the world. Of course, from a relative truth point of view, it was a very terrible event, and we can see it as the result of many karmic forces. But when we look at things from the relative point of view, we are in relative truth. To leave relative truth is to enter liberation. And it's a wide, open dimension in which things are truly different. The way in which we have structured our experience through patterns of dualistic cognition, informed by cultural attitudes and religious ideas, this is very powerful. And to let go of it creates quite a sense of dislocation. Because we are living in a world of conscious structuring. We make sense of this world. And what this idea of Hlundrup or spontaneity speaks of is a spontaneous, natural structuring of the world, which is integral to the world itself. And that can, if we can trust that, then we can let go of the burden of having to make sense of things. In order to enter that view, one has to give up attachment to knowledge, the knowledge of how things should be, all the expert knowledge that we have worked so hard to create for ourselves. It's not just giving up the negative knowledge that we have, but also the positive knowledge, the ways in which we can improve things. Because central to this is the question of what is our motivation. When we want to help other people, why do we want to help them? We see someone in trouble or difficulty and we feel a pull to help them. And that may be a very good thing in relative truth, because people really do suffer. That's undeniable. But if our intention is towards another person who we perceive as real, then there may be, if you like, a subtext, something rippling just below the surface, informing our overtly, our surface level good intention towards them. In Dzogchen meditation texts, it's that kind of subtle thought that ripples below the surface is compared to the kind of stream that you get in a meadow under the grass. You don't see it on the surface, but if you dig down, you have this whole river going. These have some intention, some purpose, which is going from this moment into the next moment. This question of the movement of the past into the future is a very important one in the Dharma. And many of you are probably familiar with the ideas of Praticca-samutpada, dependent origination, that's taught by Buddha Shakyamuni in the Salastambra Sutra. And in this, you often see it on the outside of Tibetan monastery, this wheel of life with the 12 stages going around, in which some action that's created in the past generates a certain velocity, if you like, that carries it forward into the future. And the Dharma teaches many ways in which one can try to block or shift this energy. A very powerful way of doing this is through the Bodhisattva vow, in which one makes a new kind of movement, a new kind of intention. I will help all sentient beings. I will dedicate all my energy to that. So that instead of energy being dispersed into a self-indulgent responsiveness to the moments of the world, one has an intention that takes one straight down the line. And it's a very important thing to do. It produces a great opening in the heart and a great warmth and appreciation towards other beings. And it can make one feel quite good and holy. But unfortunately, the world's not like that. Because inside this intention, there's a question. How do you help someone? It's a big question. How do we know what will best help another being? How can I go from my perception of the world to the other person's perception of the world, make sense of that, and do something that will make a difference, that will help them in a meaningful way 10 lifetimes from now? Because from the point of view of psychoanalysis, the bodhisattva vow might be seen as an omnipotent defense against the fear of death, because I can then give myself a very good reason for being immortal. I'm not doing it for me, it's for all of them. So from the point of view of Dzogchen, the essential thing is always to question the content. When something seems to arrive and to make sense, we need to put it back into play, put it back into question. Pato Rinpoche, in his commentary, Tsiktsum Nede, describes this process as being like writing on water. When you write on the surface of water, something exists for a moment, but then dissolves. But we want to be like Moses, to go to the mountain and get letters in stone, so that we will have something that's permanent and that will last forever. The Buddha is very, very subversive. To see the world with the Buddha's eyes is to be very surprised. One of the first things that Siya Lama said to me is, the Buddha's not a nice man. And I've had many years of exploring that with him. And I think it's very helpful, although sometimes I get very tired. Because it would be very nice to arrive at something that was safe and secure. And in Tantra, they talk of enlightenment as being the Tsongsa of Doji Chang, the safe fortress. That you arrive at this place and you go in and swallow the key. Nobody comes in and you don't need to go out, except bits of light come out of your heart every now and then. And this can give us a great deal of security that, we struggle for years and years and years and lifetimes, and finally we get some place that's really okay. But one might want to question it. As Jimmy Rigson often says, everything is impermanent, even enlightenment. Whether enlightenment is really impermanent or not is not really the question. The question is whether we can live with the fact that enlightenment is impermanent. Otherwise, we end up like these rich American tourists who arrive in Europe with many, many guidebooks for everything in the city. And they arrive in your hometown and they know more about it on the first day than you know, having lived there for 40 years. And all that useful, important information may also be a barrier between simple contact with walking down the street and finding out what the hell's there. So this view of spontaneity is a shift away from that. It says simply that we don't know what the future will be. We have to wait to find out. And if you want to find out what something is, you have to look. And to look is very important. I spend a lot of time in art galleries, looking at paintings. And one of the things I notice is that many people, when they come in to look at the paintings, look for maybe 1 second at the painting, and then they move over to look at who painted it and the name. And if they know the name, they go back and look again, and otherwise they go on. They don't know how to look, and so they can't see, because they want to see something important. But they've no means of working out what's important, unless it's by somebody famous. And this may be something not unfamiliar in our own lives. So spontaneity is not to enter into that game. Spontaneity is to be open, to really let our senses, our energy be open to whatever is arising, not to prejudge it. And if judgments arise, to be open to the judgment. not to enter into the judgment, but to be aware of the judgment, so that there is always a gap in which things are arising. Time is going by very quickly. So now we're going to Kada, which is primordial purity, pure from the beginning, which is the third of these 4 points from Padmasambhava about reality. Ka means the beginning, but indicates a sort of beginningless beginning. And Dat means pure. So the very simple idea, from the very beginning, everything has been pure. And the reason things have been pure is because they have never been born. One way of thinking of it would be if you look at a hologram image that's, in three-dimensional space, and you drop some dog shit on it, it won't stick. There's nothing there. When things have been always pure, it means that there is nothing there, there is no self-substance in them that could meet any other. Because things are defiled when one thing hits another thing. Defilement is only possible inside a dualistic perception. And you can see that often with small children, if they've been eating ice cream or chocolate or something, they suddenly see that they have chocolate on their hands and they look kind of surprised. You've seen that? And then someone else comes and tidies them up. And so they learn that that is something that shouldn't be there. And that's maybe important to keep their clothes clean. But in the child's moment of looking at it, there's a certain wonderment or surprise, a certain openness and inspection of what is there, which gets lost when we know that it's dirt or it's the wrong thing. So each thing in its moment of arising is completely pure, it's completely fresh. And then something is layered on top, and that meeting becomes the defilement. And in Dzogchen texts, they had many technical words around the idea of freshness or nakedness or rawness, which is essentially speaking about this kind of experience. In one of his books, Dujyo Rinpoche said that the way one should view things is like a small child in a big temple. So that between our experience, our openness, and the world, there is no intermediary. It's raw, it's naked, it's not covered by anything. Because at each moment, the world is fresh and new, and there is the arrival of our karma, of our habits, of our prejudices. Everything from our past is just meeting at the same point. And usually that covering is seemingly simultaneous. As soon as the fresh thing is there, it's immediately covered. And one could say that all the methods of meditation are designed in some way to open up a gap between the freshness of the present moment and this burden of the past. And then in that gap, we experience this kada, this primordial purity. The fourth point is primordial Buddhahood. In Tibetan is Ye Sangye. And basically the idea is that if we have not been enlightened from the very beginning, where could enlightenment come from? Because if the enlightenment was to come from somewhere else, it would be still part of the discourse of duality. It would be a familiar story. It would be like tough mummy, save me. So that some good thing would be coming from somewhere else to replace the bad thing that we have at the moment. But how could this good thing be the same as ourselves if it's coming from somewhere else? In the large Rigzen practice, or no, maybe in the small one, there is in the visualization, visualizing oneself as a deity, and then at one point it says there is a unification of the Damsikpa and the Yeshipa form, the intentional form that one constructs in meditation, and the wisdom form that is naturally occurring. And in a sense, that is a way of addressing this same question. That we have a movement of our intentionality. We are trying to do something, And that provokes a response, a positive, helpful, supportive response, and these two things fuse together. So that something is added on to ourselves. And similarly in Doji Senpa practice, something bad is taken away from us. But that kind of construction is problematic. Because if Buddha nature is innate, is always there from the very beginning, why does it need to be added to or subtracted from? And that's a very important thing to think about. Because again, from the Dzogchen point of view, the important thing is to be able to think and to question and to think, well, why is it like that? There's a story in Milarepa's collected works of a young goatherd who came to Milarepa and asked him, what is the Dharma? And Milarepa said, where is your mind? And the young man went away. And 3 days later, Milarepa went out for a walk. And he heard a noise. And he walked over and looked, and there was a hole in the ground. And in this, the shepherd was going round and round, saying, where is my mind? Where is my mind? And Milarepa gave him a little more advice on how to look. But then he said to his other disciples, you can see how to really approach the Dharma. You have to let these questions take hold of your heart. These are not a question just to go in your ear and vanish. Because this young shepherd was tortured by this question. For him it really meant something. And it's in the struggle with that question that something can shift and move. I think there's about 15 or 20 minutes left. We haven't done the history of samsara, but maybe we should do some questions. Can see what people...
So if there is an event, then there are numberless possibilities to perceive them in a dualistic way. So what is among them the pure way to perceive them? Or how is to distinguish the pure way to perceive?
The pure way is not to distinguish. And it's very hard not to distinguish. Distinguishing is an old habit and takes up a lot of energy. And so most of the time we're a little bit tired, in fact often bloody exhausted. And so that's why it's important to take care of our bodies and to bring our energy fully into the world so that we can be freshly available for the moment as it arises. It's a bit like being in a disco when they change the music at 3 in the morning and the beat is very fast and you're starting to feel a bit old. Unless it's an interesting rhythm, it won't take you. You will leave the dance. From the point of view of Dzogchen, every rhythm is interesting. So that's why it doesn't matter what you choose, because whatever you choose is great. In the Nyingma tradition, the beginning of the Dzogchen lineages is Kuntu Zangpo. This is the Buddha that represents the original Buddha nature. And Kuntu Zangpo, the name means, Kuntu means always, and Zangpo is good. And that's very, very hard for us to believe, that everything is good. There's a Zen story of a monk who came out of the monastery to buy some meat. And he went to the butcher and said, give me your best cut. And the butcher was very angry and he said, all my meat is good. And the monk understood something. And I think it's like that we get these small moments of recognition, that in some small sphere of our life, everything is okay. And without idealizing children, I think we can often see when children play together, one child will have an idea, maybe to play, I don't know, cowboys and Indians. And that game goes for a while. And then some child playing has another idea, and the energy shifts into that new idea just quickly. Because there's not an attachment to what we were in. So there's a trusting there of energy and excitement and interest. And why should children have all the fun?
So when you see that everything is all right, so even suffering is emptiness, and all these not nice things are illusion. So where does the motivation comes from to help beings suffering? When they suffer, when you see them suffering, where the motivation comes from? If you think everything is anyway okay.
Well, okay is a difficult word, isn't it? Okay could be a little bit bourgeois. It's saying it's good, it's fine, it's perfect as it is. People suffer because they don't recognize this. So it's like one of my teachers explained it to me, that it's like two brothers lying in bed together, and one is asleep in a nightmare and the other is awake. And the guru is like the brother who is awake. He's trying to waken up his brother into life, out of this painful dream. Now, it might be, I mean, you have a similar thing in psychoanalysis. When somebody has some obsessive neurotic construction in their mind, some feeling of perhaps being, I don't know, being punished by their mother, or unable to separate from their mother. And the feelings about their mother are likely to be transferred onto the analyst. Then that can be very useful in order to open up the conversation, to open up an understanding of what exactly is the nature of this neurosis, this painful structuring of experience. And in order for that to take place, the conversation has to continue as if what was being discussed was truly real, because it is real for the patient who is suffering. And so the analyst can have a lot of compassion and empathy for the person who is suffering, but is not caught up in that neurotic construction in the same way that the patient is. So maybe many times a week for many years, they will meet together to talk about this structure as if it was real. But for one person in the room, at least, it must not be real. Because if the analyst is seduced into believing that that neurotic construction is real, they're both lost. And of course, these neurotic structures are very seductive. However, I mean, that is, of course, very similar to this balance of wisdom and compassion. That we have compassion for other people. We see that they suffer, but the reason that they suffer is not the reason that they think they're suffering. And we need to hang on to that understanding, otherwise we just get stupid. It's been a long, hot afternoon. I hope that this way of looking at things is in some way useful. I mean, I think we have a meeting again tomorrow afternoon at 2:00. And you may find that some of the things I've been talking about and opening up have some edge or some pressure against some other teachings you've heard or some views that you hold. And it's fine to talk about that tomorrow. What's really important is that the Dharma touches us in some way and helps us to get on with our lives. And to set up some teaching that says higher and lower and better and more secret than others is probably not very helpful. Because the best thing for me is the thing that I can feel energy for and actually do. And if I have a whole lot of very high tantric teachings that I can't be bothered practicing, then they're no help to me. But if there's something very simple that I can do every day, do it on the bus, going to work, then it's very useful. Okay. Thank you.
Ich kann es auf jeden Fall absagen, weil ich bin am 11. September noch in Paris bei Reputation.
Okay, we start as usual by sitting quietly for 5 minutes or so.
Meditation zu sein. Erlaubt euch selbst ruhig.
There's a phrase in Tibetan, Nawayat dan Tombayum, meaning appearance is the father, emptiness is the mother. And this, we've all seen these Yabyum statues of the father and the mother together. I don't know about German culture, but in England in the last century, the advice often given to women on their marriage day was when the husband wanted to have sex, that they should lie back and think of the empire. Luckily, things have changed. And through a feminist understanding, generally in the culture, there's some sense that of feminine sexuality as something active and open and very aware. And similarly, this idea of tombeyum, of the mother as emptiness, it's not something that is there lying passively waiting for our active meditation to do something too. Whether we like it or not, we're all married to emptiness. In some marriages, husband and wife don't speak to each other. And sometimes one or other tries to beat the other one up. So we can try to beat up samsara with nirvana. We can try to dissolve everything into shunyata. But if the husband and wife can turn and look at each other and enjoy a little erotic play, then they might have a good time at night. So the essential focus is to be playful in life, to be playful with appearances and with the awareness that goes through these, and playful with emptiness. Because these two are dancing together, they're moving together all the time. The border between samsara and nirvana is just in this moment, just in this moment. Someone just asked me just before I came in, saying that, well, this is theory, but what is the practice? In a sense, the practice is to live the theory. And there are many methods if you fall out of this, we would say, view rather than theory. It's a bit like learning to ride a bicycle. You have to, when you see children learning, they're very anxious and very tight at first. And gradually, when they realize that there is a movement, a momentum that takes them forward, they can relax. So at first, we're going to feel a bit wobbly and uncertain. But we have to trust that this process will actually carry us. It's the child's fear that makes them put their foot down to test the ground again. And similarly, it's because we think that we are very heavy that we don't think emptiness will support us. And of course, we are very heavy. And there's a lot of benefits from being heavy in this world, unfortunately. Anyway, so let's go back to the beginning of this process of getting fat and heavy and stupid. The view of the origin of samsara is similar in the higher tantras and in Dzogchen, because samsara has never started. But the illusion of the starting of samsara is compared to somebody falling down a flight of stairs and at the bottom thinking, oh. And that in that moment of shock, there's a sense of a withdrawing, a pulling of energy back, and a basic separation of subject and object. This is before there's any thinking or conceptualization. There's just a sudden gap, which instead of forming together again, goes into a separated trajectory. In Tibetan, this is called Tlenchit Chepe Marikpa, which means the ignorance of, or co-emergent ignorance. It's because there is reality and not knowing reality that are there together. And there's a kind of anxiety between these two. It's maybe similar to the experience some of you may have had, I certainly have, of being in a relationship with someone and getting somehow uncertain whether I'm loved or not, and then saying to them, do you love me? And by saying, do you love me, I make it that they don't love me, because it becomes a question. And the more one pursues the question, the bigger the gap becomes. So there's this first subtle splitting off. But, I mean, in English, certainly, we translate marikpa or avidya as ignorance. But really, it's not a stable state. It's a very active process. If ignorance was simply just, cut out, go dead, life would probably be simpler. But the mind starts to become very active at that point. Like a jealous lover, one's always very concerned what the other is up to. This second stage of ignorance is called kuntu tagpe marikpa. And kuntu tagpa, kuntu means always, and tagpa means to label or to name. So it's the state of ignorance in which one is always putting things in their place, trying to work out what the shape and nature of things are. So, it's a familiar process psychologically, probably for all of us. When we feel anxious, we compensate for that by wanting to have control. Like the husband who needs to beat up his wife because he thinks she's fucking someone else. Through this all-naming ignorance, the outer environment starts to take shape, and correspondingly, in the increasingly complex interaction of subject and object, there is the development of language and the internal structuring of the knowing mind, of the psyche, and gradually a movement into taking form. And I would suggest that this is not just theory, this is something that we all experience every time at the end of our meditation. When you come out of the meditation, there's a sense of spaciousness, and then after a while things become more solid, more separated, more impacted. Then we move into the third stage of ignorance, which is called Lejumdre la Nyompe Marikpa, which is the ignorance of the stupidity of not understanding karma, which means that there's a constant process of attributing false causality in situations. And this, of course, is where modern therapies become very stupid, because it works from the basic idea that children are born sweet and innocent, and that the nasty bad world gives them a hard time, and so they become bad in turn. At best, one could read that as the possibility of the object context holding our karma for us, so that all our negativity is held into a projected other, who then gives it back to us. But still there's the possibility of blaming the other as the initial true cause. Our Buddhist understanding is rather different. There is, in Tibetan, this word karma is le jum dre, and le means an action, ju means a cause, and dre means really a consequence rather than a result. So that, say for example, I kill you, there's an action, the result is that you're dead, but the consequence goes on much, much further. Yeah. How these consequences manifest is much more subtle. In general, in understanding karma, there are 4 factors. The first is called ji, or ground. The second is sampa, which is thought or intention. The third is jorwa, which is a connection or fulfillment. And the fourth is tartuk, which is fulfillment in the sense of finality, accomplishment. So, if we stay with the example of killing, because it's most clear, if I want to kill someone, then first of all there has to be someone for me to kill. So first of all there is the perception of another person or another animal or being or something. Then there is an intention towards that other, which is maybe I don't like this person for some reason. So it'd be an intention from anger, or it could be I'm very hungry, I want to kill this animal, or it could be through jealousy, this person's been fucking my woman, could be anything. But this intention separates that person out of a general context and makes them seem very important, very strongly real. And then there's the carrying through of that intention by taking a knife or a gun or poison or push them down the stairs. There's something in which I actually make contact with the other and bring my will into the object. Then after that, I see that this person is dead, and I think, damn good. So I am fully in harmony at that point with the whole trajectory of my intention. In that way, I gain the full effect of the karma of that killing. That's why guilt is very important. Because guilt makes a gap on that point of one standing, oh God, there's a separation off from the action. And that opens up the possibility of changing, of moderating the effect of the karma. And of course, it's better if you can stop at the third stage by turning back. When actually meeting the other and looking in their eyes, it's not possible. And of course, it's better if you can stop it at the second stage of intention, when you start to feel angry with the other, or you start to feel hungry and want to kill something, and then there's some other way of dealing with that situation. You can dissolve the anger or attend to your desire in some other way. And of course, needless to say, it's best if you can stop at number one, which is the place in which we see the other as truly real. If one does not perceive anything or any situation as substantially real, the impetus to act towards it in a negative way is greatly diminished. One might say totally diminished, but you never know. And this is very important in terms of what we were talking about in the last 2 days. Because of course it's possible to take a negative reading of the Dzogchen view and to see it as a license to great self-indulgence, to do whatever you like. But maybe some of you have the experience, which I think is probably common for all of us, is that when we do something that is negative, something that has a bad connotation, there's a certain degree of tension and anxiety in ourselves, whether we experience it in our body, our breathing, our dreams, our thoughts, which is one of the great paradoxes, because although most of us are very lazy, it's actually very hard work to be a bastard. We actually spend a lot of time and energy doing bad things and being concerned and worried about doing them. That can be on any level, whether it's having an affair or getting to work late or not doing your practice, all the things that build a little bit of guilt and worry into your life. So we become deeply addicted to wasting energy. Because in the very moment where we are debilitating ourselves, draining ourselves of energy, there's a kind of excitement. In that way, sin is like cocaine. It gets you high, but you feel pretty wrecked afterwards. And when we're under the power of this third ignorance, we don't actually understand this whole pattern of cause and effect. So we're very busy in our lives, doing things, creating meaning for ourselves, carrying the whole burden of establishing ourselves in the world, relationships with others. But the subtext of reality is missing. And some of you may be familiar with the work of Derrida. Derrida, it's a French philosopher. And
You think so?
you well, maybe not. But anyway, a very interesting person, because he has opened up a way of reading text, literature, many different things, which he calls a deconstructive move.
Deconstructed.
Yeah.
Which means
Means not to destroy. It's between construct and destroy. In which one looks beneath the surface message of the text to find out what other things are at play and are hidden by the very power of our culturally determined reading. And essentially in Dzogchen we do a similar thing. We go deeper into the text, which is written by our karmic impulse. Good. As I was saying earlier, ignorance is very active. And that activity is writing or creating our world for us moment to moment. And some Dharma methods try to cut that process. And they do it by juxtaposing emptiness and appearance. So that emptiness then becomes the antidote to the clinging to the powerful, solidified presence of the object as other. Whereas Dzogchen's intention is to explore what is at play in our presence in the world. Because if we think of this movement from this initial shock into the second stage of ignorance, of naming and taking control through knowledge, and then the busyness of not understanding that we have set up the rules of the game and then forgotten that we did it. You know, to go back up through these stages is very difficult. Because it's like swimming up a waterfall, there's a pressure coming down. That's why in Dzogchen the essential thing is to give oneself the moment of initial experience. Well, I said there give, but that would be the wrong verb. More it's like to allow ourselves to stop the defensive activity, the busyness of constructing the world, so that we have the space in which to see what the world actually is. I don't know if any of you have had the experience, if you go into a situation that you don't know well, one way to find yourself is to be useful. Like if you go to a party and you don't know anyone, you can take a tray of something and offer it to other people. And it's exactly that movement into activity as the defense against the anxiety of not knowing who one is that is vital to stay with in Dzogchen. Because that's the link between the second and the first ignorance. Because there's a difference between knowledge and awareness. Awareness is responsive. Knowledge is controlling. If we can stay with this ability to respond and to be open, then we will always be light and flexible and in the dance of life. And even these big heavy herukas like Vajrakila with wings and 3 heads and 4 legs are described as having 9 kinds of dancing. Because even the Buddha, although it's described that the Buddha knows the 3 times, I think perhaps we need to take that kind of message with a pinch of salt. The traditional description of the Buddha is that he has 3 qualities. Kien, Se, Nu, which means wisdom or understanding, compassion and power. Now, if he has all 3 of these things fully present, which is claimed, then you have the same problem as you do in Christian ethics. If God is all powerful and all good, why doesn't he stop the suffering in the world? If the Buddha understands everything, has great compassion and has great power, he could end the whole damn thing now. Sadly, from a point of view of Dzogchen, you would need to read the meaning of these words in a different way. When we grow up, we have to live without mummy and daddy. And that's very difficult. We spend a lot of time looking for other mummies and daddies. And in my experience, it doesn't work out too well. Maybe you're more lucky. So, if we think, who is going to take responsibility for us? What is it that we want someone else to take responsibility for? Those who get rescued are victims. But who am I a victim of? Samsara, bad karma, or myself? So if I'm persecuting myself, why don't I stop it? If I ask someone else to stop it, then I remain as the victim and pass my power over to someone else. And then what? And this is a central question, and we won't come to any answer. And of course, you probably gathered that I'm not very interested in answers. Answers are cheap. One of the most powerful experiences in my life was when I was in university going into the library and walking up rows and rows and rows of books and just being so overwhelmed by all these words. Because the solutions that we get from the accounts by others of the nature of reality usually in some way provide a foreclosure to the openness of our own experience. I mean, I really don't think we can escape from the fact that our world is complicated. Picture, if you will, a midnight scene. There is a quiet knock on the door. Very quietly, a man walks to the door and opens it gently, seeing his servant waiting. The servant says, "Shh." Gently they go down to the courtyard. The servant has already wrapped the horse's feet with cloth so they won't make a noise. The young master gets on the horse and together they leave the house. In another room, the man's young wife and baby are sleeping. Next morning, the mother-in-law comes and says, "Where is my son?" This is in India, so it's quite difficult for the young wife. Now, of course, you will have recognized this is the story of the way Shakyamuni Buddha left his kingdom. In order to gain enlightenment and save all sentient beings, he betrayed his wife and child. Even for a Buddha, life is hard. And closer to home in the Nyingma tradition, closer to home, in maybe more in our family, when after Guru Rinpoche had been born on a lotus in the Danakosha lake, as a beautiful young boy of 8 years old, very charming and sweet, fulfilling all the hopes and desires of his blind adoptive father, Indrabhuti. After some years, when the king wanted to hand over the kingdom to him, the young guru, perhaps as a typical teenager, he decided to do something. So one day he climbed to the top of a tower and did a dance with his vajra and bell. While dancing, by luck or intention or whatever, the vajra came out of his hand, flew through the air and landed on the head of a small baby. Needless to say, the baby died. There was uproar in the kingdom. Everyone was very upset. They said, "This is a terrible young man. We can't have him as our king. But because he's an adopted prince, we can't kill him." So he was kicked out of the kingdom and went to the cemetery of Tsilwesal near Bodh Gaya, where he met the Dakini Leki Wongmoche, received initiations into the 8 tantric teachings, and the rest is history. So in everyone's life there are some problems, and it helps if you have wealthy parents. And this is really important to remember, I think, anyway. It's not that the bad and the negative can be excluded so that the world becomes a very pure place. That is to misunderstand purity. That is to promote a dualistic vision which says that purity is better than badness or dirt. To stay with that view condemns purity to a symbiosis with dirt or impurity. The notion of kadak that I was talking of yesterday is not about that. It's about an all-inclusive vision in which the absolute purity of every moment is allowed. One last point about this. All of you have seen these tankas, Tibetan paintings of the Buddha at the moment of enlightenment, where he's sitting and usually there's kind of rainbows around him. And there are demons firing weapons at him that turn into flowers. And at his feet there are 3 women dancing. One is a beautiful young virgin, one is a voluptuous woman in midlife, and the other is an ugly old hag, and they are all naked. And those of you who are familiar with feminist readings of the place of women in Western culture will recognize these stereotypes. However, they are in the picture. Usually, I think when we look at a tanka like that, we see the Buddha as one thing, and then there are the obstacles or the enemies around the Buddha. And the Buddha is protected from these obstacles or enemies by this ray of light and this wonderful wisdom that keeps them at a distance. A non-dual reading would be rather different. If we prioritize or place as central the Buddha and put down the other, then we decontextualize the situation. But we all live in a body, in the world, in a situation. The moment of the Buddha's enlightenment is inseparable from the attack of the Maras. There is the Buddha achieving something, and around him anger and desire are playing. This is the total picture of enlightenment. And it's happening for us all now, moment to moment to moment to moment. Our enlightenment and our desire and our anger and our jealousy are arising together, moment by moment. And even when we get enlightened, it will continue to be the same. It'll just be a bit easier to see what's going on. Otherwise, we'll be like the nouveau riche, who deny their proletarian background and pretend that they are more superior than anyone else. This is to privilege, again, a hierarchical mode of seeing the world, where the Buddhas are up there and we are down here. I think we need to remember in this Tibetan wheel of life, you have the 6 sections, the 6 realms, the heavens, the hells, whatever. And in each of these realms, there is a Buddha who arrives there and takes on a form appropriate to the situation of the people. And so the Dharma is taught in ways that people will understand. There has to be a fit between the concrete situation of the individual and the teacher's presence. And we historically are at a time when perhaps our culture is moving away from such a hierarchical determination. Tibetan culture wasn't so lucky. Someone else came in and did it for them. I'm not being frivolous about this, but I think there is definitely, again, a question about the nature of authority. If one is conceptualizing the world in terms of a parent-child relationship, it makes a lot of sense to have the big, powerful monastery and the ordinary, simple villagers. I'm not sure about the experience you have in Germany, but for me, living in London, I live in a street where 80% of the people are not British, are from foreign countries. It's a developing, multiracial, multicultural, multi-language society. And whose way, shall we say, is the best way to go forward? When young Muslim children, girls in England wear a chadar, many so-called really British, pure British people are very offended by this. They say, well, this is not our culture, these people are foreigners, what are they doing here? They should fit in with us. And they want to sort out what is pure and what is impure. And I'm sure we're all aware of the hellish events in Yugoslavia with this idea of ethnic cleansing. These are all consequences of dualistic thinking operating through the metaphor of hierarchy. If we think of the 4 principles about the nature of reality taught by Padmasambhava, non-dual, effortlessly arising, primordial purity, and primordial Buddhahood, it becomes clear that there is enough space for everything to exist just as it is, without pressure to become something else. The compassion of wisdom is to leave things alone so that they can become themselves. When I see how relaxed and easy it is for the children in this camp, I'm quite amazed. I grew up in a culture where I was always being told what was right, what was wrong, when to be quiet, when to do this, when to do that. And that might be familiar for some. You're doing okay. We're getting there. We're almost there. And I think what we see is how children, there's a bit more chaos here, but somehow children find a place. If we relax into allowing the noise of children through the teaching and through the pujas, there's enough space for it. We can include that. And it's a continuation of that process of openness and inclusion that allows things to be just as they are and doesn't try to force them into another way because they are against my interest. Very briefly, I'll say something on practice, and then maybe if you can see if there's any questions or thoughts, because this is something to think about. One of the things that we have to try to do is to trick ourselves into being more open than we want to be. And that's why in the Dzogchen tradition, this word pet is very important. So one very simple way of making use of this that's taught by many teachers, but I think it's maybe known to some of you through this text from Patrul Rinpoche, commonly called Siksum Nede. where he says that one should just sit very relaxed in one's body, sit in an upright place so that the spine is straight, and sit, and then suddenly just let this word pat come up. And you do it yourself when you have space and nobody's going to bother you. And if you allow this word to arise, you can have it as a kind of, if you're boiling water and it's just below boiling. So there's an intention, but you don't know when it's going to come. And then you just let it boil up like milk, boiling over. And Patrul Rinpoche describes the experience that you can have after that, in that moment that follows it, as Hadewa. And Hadewa has a sense of a kind of shock or a kind of confusion in which you don't quite know what's going on. And if you remember when I was talking about the first stage of ignorance, Lenchi Chepi Maripa, I said that traditionally it's described as somebody falling down the stairs and they go, ah! So in this way one shocks oneself right back to the primordial moment, which is always there. Ignorance is not something that happened a long, long time ago. It's something that we create all the time. Maybe you've seen in these old Hollywood movies, when somebody has a shock and they get in a terrible thing, somebody slaps them. And then the person, and they know where they are. And maybe fall in love with a hero. You might get that too in your meditation. But it's very similar. A shock has happened, we got lost. And we continue getting lost more and more and more. And then there's another shock, and in that shock we find ourselves. Because the trajectory of getting lost gets worse and worse and worse and worse. It's like sometimes if a small child loses its mother and starts to get more and more anxious and then gets into a complete rage, where even if the mother arrives, it can hardly recognize the mother because it's so kind of lost and confused. And the mother has to find a way of breaking through the anxiety so the child recognizes and then collapses into that. To make a reference to Tantra as well, in the larger tantric practices, in the stages of the development of the mandala, there are usually 3 stages. The first is called Deshinyiki Tingizin, the meditation on thatness or reality. And in that, one merges into emptiness and stays as open and relaxed as one can for as long as possible. Then there's the second stage of Kundunangwe Tingizin, the meditation of the manifestation of appearance. And in that, out of this state of emptiness, rays of rainbow light arise and fill the whole vastness. And of course they don't arise out of it, they arise just as in it, rather than out of it. And then these rays of rainbow light coalesce together to form a letter. And that's the third stage, the Gyui Tingizin, the meditation of the cause. And that cause is the seed letter out of which the central deity and the whole mandala arise. And you can see that these 3 stages are in a sense paralleling the 3 stages of ignorance. Because in the second stage of ignorance, in this Kundutalpi Maripa, in this all-naming ignorance, there is a movement out into the world, but it is one of control and domination out of an anxious tension. Whereas in the meditation, in the Kundunangwe Tingizin, there is the unfolding of this luminous richness, plenitude, filling everything. In general, in the Nyingma system, the larger practices, in fact this large Rigsen practice that we do, is a fusion of all the different kinds of practice that there are. So that the essential view in it is Dzogchen. But it also has meditation that's built up by stages, as in Mahayoga, and spontaneous transformation, as in Anu Yoga, as I mentioned yesterday. And of course it starts with refuge, which we could say is a Hinayana practice, and then development of the Bodhisattva vow, which is Mahayana, and then the presentation of offerings like Argam, Padyam, Pushpe. All these general pleasant offerings belong to Kriya Yoga and Charya Yoga, the edge of Anuttara Yoga. So this style of practice is saying that there is space for everything. Every view can open up things, can reinforce other views. There's a way of adapting the style, which is not about saying, I belong to this is what I do, and I don't want that. Because essentially we can say that a Dzogchen practice is any practice that helps you to get into the state of Dzogchen, of recognition of yourself, and then helps you to continue in that state. So, I mean, in this large Rigzen practice, there is on page 107, and you can look at it some other time, but it has this verse about Deta Mikiyu du Nangwai, about regarding the objects that we see in the outside world. And that goes on, these verses link on till page 111. Maybe you could just skip the first slide. And these are there are 4 verses there, and they're very important for reminding ourselves of the way into Dzogchen. Because what they do is they link devotion to the Guru with the state. And this is very important in Tantra, that we live in this world of dispersed objects. And according to this idea of the second stage of ignorance, we are all the time putting out these namings and these identifications on the world to make sense of it. By devotion to the deity or the Guru, we can dissolve into his state, and then out of that state, we go back out into this world, to the complete richness of the world, without making any discriminations, but allow ourselves to be open to the world, because we know that everything in the world has the same taste, has the same nature, which is the nature of the Guru. Right? So we start with a positive accentuation, saying that the Guru is good in terms of the duality of good and bad. And by making use of this duality, which of course from an absolute truth point of view is a false duality, we make use of the relative truth splitting of good and bad to increase our faith and devotion, to take us into one point, then to take us out into the world where we experience everything as good. But good as all good in the sense of Kuntuzampo, Samantabhadra. And so we can use this practice to remind us of this point of experience. It's not that we're praying to the Guru to give us something that we don't have, but using the energy of the Guru to create the gap in which we recognize that which we truly are. Okay, the Khenpo Rinpoche is going to start at 4, so maybe if we have at least a 10-minute gap, so we take some questions up till about 10.
So if everything is primordially pure and everything has the Buddha nature, and then karma obviously also must be an illusion.
Karma is an illusion. Yeah? It's an illusion in terms of absolute truth, or in terms of if you understand it. If you don't understand it, it's very unpleasant. Well, maybe very pleasant, because it's also good karma. We're all here because of our good karma. And of course, from the Dzogchen point of view, there would be no discrimination between absolute and relative truth. If you stay in the understanding of Dzogchen, if you stay in the understanding of yourself, nothing can harm you. I mean, in real terms, of all the people sitting in here, probably, I don't know, a quarter of us will get cancer, or maybe 10% get some kind of degenerative disease like multiple sclerosis, go blind, go deaf, have some painful rheumatism, something like that. Unfortunately, Dzogchen doesn't take us away from birth, old age, sickness, and death. But when our karma comes to meet us, we have a choice as to how we recognize it. We can say, fuck off, you bastard, leave me alone. But that doesn't work very well if you've got cancer. or we can welcome it and dissolve into it, a surrendering to fate which leads to a quick exit. But there's also the possibility of a playful endurance, a living through. And of course, it's easy enough to talk of these things when we're relatively young and healthy. Sooner or later, life will give us an examination. And it's at that point that we know whether we have understood something or not.
Here's one question.
Is it like this that you, when you went to practice on the cemeteries in India or wherever, is it that you make yourself in a situation where you proved yourself how to handle with fears and the death and all kinds of fears, that you overcame this, or that you vorausnehmen,
Anticipated.
this kind of situation which may arise?
Maybe. When it comes again, I'll know. So, I mean, in the teachings of the 10 stages in the Bodhisattva way of thinking, when you get to the 7th stage, moving from the 7th stage into the 8th stage, you enter what are called the 3 irreversible stages. And once you get there, you're safe. That may or may not be true, but I think that the only way to be safe is to be alive and aware each moment. Because everything is impermanent. Everything is really impermanent. And meditation is also impermanent. And so if we concretize or conceptualize the gain as being something out there, it may vanish.
He says for him it's quite difficult to understand the notion of karma, because in Western culture we have mainly, that's what he thinks at least, 2 notions of causality. One is the very simplistic deterministic notion of causality used in science, like everything has to follow deterministic laws, and so there is no aspect of morality in it. It just, if you kick it on, then it goes on like it should go. Or there is the theologic way of causalistic thinking, like there is a higher intelligence, and this higher intelligence set up rules once forever, and then everything has to fit in these rules. So can we say that that karma is something in between these two? Or?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we are all being punished now by the adolescence of science, which acts as if there is no response from the world to one's action. And on the other hand, we suffer from the anxiety of the collapse of the monolithic phallocentric structures. And so in the middle, karma is quite a good way of recognizing that we do it to ourselves. This is self-responsibility.
So concerning the practice, she understands what we should do is to become open. We should train ourselves. We must train ourselves.
Very hard.
Very hard training ourselves to become open. But this is it enough, or is there something to make to practice on bus or during the work? Or
the main thing is to put yourself in the place of getting the experience, which can be through meeting with a Lama, intensively practicing yourself to a point where you recognize, you have at least some beginning recognition of yourself, and then to bring yourself back to that again and again. And one useful way is, anytime, is as you breathe in with Om, hold the breath with Ah, and breathe out with Hung. Or you can use something like Lama Keno. Just Lama Keno, just do it once, dissolve in light, and just come out into the world.
what you mean, the Lama, dissolving Lama in oneself?
No, just dissolve yourself in light, or the Guru in a second. Yeah. You can do that in 10 seconds. So you can do it while you're having a quarrel with your partner, and just shift the energy, just move out into some other place. Because we get caught up in situations that have a momentum.
Then,
okay, maybe one last question.
As far as I know from the teachings on previously, it's
that you necessarily have to experience emptiness.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't get it, but for the person we could fit to experience emptiness, love.
Absolutely, yeah.
The-
Except for the methods of approaching emptiness through a conceptualized deconstruction of the object, like
Madhyamaka
yeah,
discussion.
that kind of stuff. That wouldn't help. It's a direct experience of being in emptiness. Maybe in thinking about Dzogchen, it's better to, instead of using the word empty, to take the same concept and call it open. Perhaps we should stop there.
Ja, das war's dann.
Thank you.
Thank you.